So, John Whittingdale, David Davis is in breach of Parliament, isn't he? There was a vote. Parliament demanded to see the papers unredacted and in full, and he failed to deliver.
Well, Parliament had also said that the government shouldn't release material which could jeopardise our negotiating position. That was a decision taken by Parliament earlier. And the important thing here is that we get the best possible deal for this country. It is the biggest issue facing this country, and certainly I would not want the government to release anything which could put that at risk.
Right. Is he in breach of Parliament by failing to supply the papers in full? We'll come on to what's sensitive and should be redacted or could be redacted. Has he failed to do what was demanded of him by Parliament?
Well, in my view, no, because the Parliament had previously said that we shouldn't release documents.
So what do you say to Hilary Benn, who is now summoning David Davis to explain himself and says he could be in breach of parliamentary privilege?
Well, the committee was not unanimous on that view. I support summoning David Davis. I think he does need to answer some questions, particularly about whether there is information in the documents we have been given that is sensitive, as he has suggested, and therefore perhaps we shouldn't even release those.
Right, well, if he has released that, why can't he release everything?
Well, in David Davis's letter, there are 2 points. The first says that he hasn't supplied all the information because he's withheld some that could put at risk our negotiating position. But he's also gone on to say that even within the documents he's given us, there is some sensitive material which he'd prefer not to be made public. Right. And we want to ask him about both those things. Right.
Do you think the committee under Hilary Benn has overstepped the mark?
Well, I mean, all that Hilary Benn has done is said that the committee may wish to consider. That is not overstepping the mark. There are people on the committee who do wish to consider, and so it's reasonable to say that. Right. The question is whether or not we conclude that there has been any breach of privilege. My own view is that there has not. Right.
I mean, Paul Blomfield, we are in the middle of perhaps one of the most important set of negotiations ever. Why should the government be forced to give away sensitive information that wouldn't be in the national interest and might undermine their negotiating position?
Well, let's be clear, and I wound up the debate for the Labour Party on the 1st of November and made it clear that we do not want to see commercially sensitive information released. We do not want to see the negotiating position compromised, but we do want to see the 58 sectoral impact assessments released unredacted to the Brexit Select Committee.
Well, how can they be unredacted if they include exactly the sensitive, commercially sensitive information you've just spoken about?
Because we are talking about them not being published openly, but to the Select Committee, which could then decide what publication could be made more widely.
Right, and do you trust the members of Select Committees? I mean, bearing in mind David Davis's letter was leaked and ended up in a newspaper. Does that bode well for confidentiality?
Well, I don't think it bodes well for the accountability of government if we start from the premise that we can't trust Select Committees, which work across a whole range of issues in a whole range of areas and receive regular confidential information. Our system of accountability begins to break down if governments are marginalising Select Committees in this way.
Right. Well, that's obviously a point, John Whittingdale. Do you not trust your fellow parliamentarians? I mean, either we have a system that works and that you can deal with sensitive information, otherwise all you're going to see is information that we can all see in the public domain.
Well, in this case, of course, you have a Select Committee of 20 members. And the information has also been given to the Lords Select Committee, and it's been given to the devolved administration. So this information is going to a lot of people.
Right. Do you trust your fellow parliamentarians?
I have chaired a Select Committee for 10 years. And during that time, we had to have leak inquiries because information was leaked. I'm afraid there is plenty of precedence for this happening. And on a committee this size, where one has to say that perhaps not every member is as committed to obtaining a good deal as I am and my colleagues, in those instances, I can see why the Secretary of State is reluctant.
Well, what do you say to that, Paul Blomfield?
Well, I think there is an important principle here, and you alluded to it at the outset of this piece. At every point during this process, government has tried to marginalise Parliament. Parliament is absolutely central in what are the most important negotiations facing this country. And I made it very clear at the end of the debate that if the government didn't wish to release, as the Commons wanted it to, those papers unredacted, then they should have voted against our motion, or they should have amended it. They chose not to, and the motion was very clear that the papers should be released in full to the Select Committee.
Right, but you haven't answered the question about the problems of leaks and leaks of sensitive information that could damage Britain's position in these negotiations. We know that leaks happen all the time, so why would we risk it with these negotiations?
Well, I have to say that some of the most damaging leaks that have come out through the negotiations are from within the Cabinet, with government ministers briefing against each other, and that's caused enormous damage to the process and to the confidence in where this government's taking us. I think we have to work on the principle that our select committees are to be trusted and to fulfil their responsibilities properly, because once government starts saying, well, we're not going to give them this information because we've got to worry about it, or we're not going to give them that information, then the system of parliamentary accountability breaks down.
Right, but even the EU themselves have said they wouldn't give away potentially sensitive information. In their fact sheet on trade negotiations, they say a certain level of confidentiality is necessary to protect EU interests and to keep chances for a satisfactory outcome high. Are they wrong?
No, they're absolutely right.
Well, isn't that what the British governments do?
What we have said, and we made it absolutely clear, and I made this point in the Commons when we were concluding the debate, we do not want to see the public release of information which is confidential or compromising the negotiating position, but we want to see that full information made available to the Select Committee responsible in the House of Commons.
Right. I mean, David Davis is making this up as he goes along, isn't he? I mean, there weren't any impact assessment papers in the first place, and Parliament, in the end, called his bluff.
Well, I haven't even yet seen the documents that we have been given. There are apparently 850 pages, and we only got them last night. And we've only got one copy. So until I've had a chance to look at them, I don't know quite what they will consist of. But of course, we won't actually know what the material that has been withheld is, so we don't know to the extent to which they're complete or not.
Right.
So to some extent, this is all something of a political game going on.
Right. Well, you're saying it's for short-term political gain, but even Brexit Secretary David Davis said to a committee of MPs, and this is in December last year, we've carried out, or in the midst of carrying out, about 57, I think, sectoral analyses, each of which has implications for individual parts of 85% of the economy, and some of those are still to be concluded. And yet, when, of course, the vote was lost, nobody could seem to put their hands on these in-detail papers written about different sectors of the economy.
Well, as I understand it, this is an ongoing process. They are documents that are continually having new information added to them. The government has now said that they will give us the documents at the time that the vote was carried, but of course they will have gone on evolving since then. Right,
but that's the point, Paul Bromfield. These documents don't really exist in the form that you have actually outlined, do they?
Well, in that case, there is a much more serious question about trusting government, because David Davis both told the Brexit Select Committee in December, as you highlight, that work was being done, and then he provided in October the Lords Committee with a list of 58, they'd added one to the 57 in December, 58 sectoral impact assessments that he said had been undertaken. If those in fact hadn't been undertaken, then we're in very serious territory.
Right, well, if you don't know that they existed in the first place, what are you criticising here? You haven't actually seen the contents of the documents so far. You don't even know if they existed in the first place. So what is this all about?
Well, I take the Secretary of State's word at face value. He said this work was being undertaken, and he reported on the 58 reviews that had taken place. I'm not doubting that. All we want to do is to see them.
Right, but you haven't seen them, and yet you are criticising the process, criticising the content of papers that you haven't yet seen.
Well, the Secretary of State said that the government had undertaken 58 sectoral impact assessments. The House of Commons voted that they should be released in full to the Brexit Select Committee. That's what we are concerned about. Either that work hasn't been undertaken, which is very serious for the country if they haven't actually taken the economic impact assessments on the negotiations that they are deeply involved in, which are going to affect everybody's jobs and livelihoods, or they have and they're not releasing them in full. Either way, this is serious territory.
Right. I mean, the question is one of transparency, John Whittingdale, and even the Tory MP Jacob Rees-Mogg is supporting Labour and Paul Bromfield in this, because he says that they have to be published, these papers, in full to the Brexit Select Committee. The motion does not allow for redaction and a happy chat across the dispatch box between the shadow spokesman and the ministers, and it doesn't reduce the right of this House to see the papers. He's correct.
Well, I know that is Jacob's view, which is expressed. I don't entirely agree with him. In this particular instance, I think that there is a much bigger issue at stake, which is that getting the right deal for this country is absolutely imperative.
And transparency can be pushed to the side.
Anything which, well, if it involves releasing information which could potentially undermine our negotiation, yes.